just a really big warm welcome to this webinar, France out of Africa, Niger and the anti-imperialist revolt in the Sahel. We are pleased to know that, we're reaching people from all around the world today, and we hope that we just have sort of like a really good discussion, which will be facilitated and led by our lovely speakers who are joining us here tonight. So my name is Fiona Sim. I will be your chair for the evening. So I'm just moderating, facilitating the discussion and the speaking portions. I am one of the co-founders of the Black Liberation Alliance, who are the hosts of the event, and we came together sort of during the, I guess, the peak of the pandemic lockdown, and our whole purpose is to demonstrate the unity of African, Asian, Arab, Caribbean, and other Black and Indigenous communities for our liberation. And the Black Liberation Alliance, we've called this event because the revolts all across Africa and particularly are invigorating, and it's really important and a really key time for us to be paying attention to what's going on in the world, to what is going on in the Sahel at the moment, especially in the regions where Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, and of course Niger all lie. And it should be within all of our interests to follow these events closely and constantly keep up to date with what imperialism is doing next. Because in order for the world, for Africa, for Latin America, for all the oppressed nations of the world to shake off the chains of imperialism, of colonialism and neo-colonialism, it requires solidarity. And we believe it is necessary for all of us to share our solidarity during this time. But in order to do so, we need to get educated. We need to get critical of our media, of our mainstream media, on what exactly it is reporting about what's going on in these countries. It's important that we're critical of what the West, the so-called West, France, UK, US, are all saying about these things, because they're very indicative of the current political situation, and they can often disguise what's actually going on. And what's actually going on is something we're going to be exploring a little bit more into today. And, we are proud to have worked with a number of Pan-Africanist organizations, diaspora organizations throughout the UK to call the protest outside the French embassy last week, just as ECOWAS decided on military intervention against Niger. And this week, it comes as I guess some relief that the African Union has actually rejected the ECOWAS proposal for military intervention in Niger. And from here on out, from the belly of the beast of imperialism in Britain, in quote unquote Great Britain, we are clear that every act of solidarity counts, as the governments of the West attempt to stabilize the status quo in their bid for so-called democracy that they have profited so well from, and at the expense of the African peoples for centuries. So we hope today you find that this session is informative and educational. Please feel free to take notes. Feel free to make your comments, ask your questions, react, and show all of our amazing speakers some love, because they have put in a lot of time into preparing this for you and coming to speak with you today and teach you about what exactly is going on and how we can all be in solidarity with the revolts, the anti-imperialist revolts and resistance across the African continent, as well as in the diaspora. Without further ado, we will begin with our first speaker. So our first speaker is Professor Dr. Sahidi Bilan from the Diaspora Association of Niger Republic Nationals in the United Kingdom, also abbreviated or known as DAN UK. And Professor Dr. Sahidi Bilan is a senior lecturer and academic at the University of Sunderland, a political analyst, and has given a number of important media interviews on the current situation in Niger. And let's all please give a warm welcome to Professor Dr. Sahidi Bilan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for introducing me. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to introduce and to analyze the political crisis in Niger, where I'm from. So I just want to say this: everything which will be said is not on behalf of the University of Sunderland, for which I work, but is my own opinion. So I'm just sharing with you my views about the situation, which affects me as well, because I'm a national of Niger, So, as you know, on the 26th of July, 2023, there was a coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat in Niger. So this came as a surprise because it was not expected, and no one could predict what may have happened. Just suddenly a coup d'etat happened, and what happened is that no one got killed during that coup d'etat. And this coup d'etat is basically the fourth one which Niger, since independence, has experienced, without mentioning the many other failed coup d'etats. I think there were three of them which were not successful. So this is the fourth one, which is right now going on, which we can say maybe is a successful. We don't know yet because the situation is got really complicated now, but we'll discuss all this. Niger is most of the time confused with Nigeria, but there are two different countries. Although all of them are located in West Africa, but the fundamental difference between Niger and Nigeria is that Niger was a French colony, so they speak French there. And in Nigeria, the main language, as you know, the official language is English. So Niger is a French-speaking country, although also many people from Niger are the same ethnic groups which can be found in Nigeria, like Hausa people, Fulanis, can find them in both countries. So Niger is a country situated in West Africa, as I said, and it is the biggest country in West Africa. Its neighbors are Algeria, Libya, Chad, Nigeria, Benin, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Burkina Faso. And the size of the country is 1,267,000 quadrat kilometers. So, which means that Niger is the biggest, country in West Africa. And 2/3 of Niger are desert. 2/3 of Niger are desert, and it is what they call as made of the Sahara Desert. I'm sure that many of you have heard of Sahara Desert. So 2/3 of Niger are part of Sahara Desert. And Niger got independence on the 3rd of August 1960. So it's a home of 25 million people. And in 1995, Niger, became member of the economic regional organization called ECOWAS. So ECOWAS is the economic community of West African states. And the purpose of this organization is to facilitate economic integration among its members, and also to promote free movement of people among all these countries. ECOWAS is made of, has 15 member states, 15 member states. So Niger, Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Cape Verde, to just quote some of them. So they are part of what they call, ECOWAS, and also they all belong to a currency organization called IMOA. IMOA is basically an organization which bring all the countries sharing the franc CFA, the franc CFA. So it's the local currency which is affiliated to the euro through France. Basically, France is the garant of that currency. A very critical currency, which right now is dismissed by many people because the currency, the franc CFA, is a way of dominating the countries. But we'll discuss all this. So all these countries are members of the currency, as I said, the zone, what they call the CFA zone. and they're all also ex-colonies of France. So the currency is printed and controlled by France and in France. It's important also to note that Niger has been blessed with natural resources, such as uranium, oil, gold, coal, water, clean water, drink water, and basically the natural resources. Niger has a lot of natural resources. Although Niger is portrayed, and that's a fact as well, Niger is one of the poorest countries on earth, I would say, one of the poorest countries in terms of living standards, in terms of, the way. So in terms of, in the economic perspective is, one of the poorest countries, but Niger is also, in terms of natural resources, I would say, the richest country in West Africa. So Niger has also, in terms of geographical position, it has a strategic position in the sense that Niger is a junction between Algeria, which is North Africa, Chad, which is East Africa, and the rest of countries which are all in West Africa. So you can see, in terms of geopolitical, position, Niger is a strategic position for all external forces, for the Western countries which are trying to dominate that country. So from all the neighboring countries, only Nigeria is actually, as I said before, an English colony, but the rest all are French colonies. So the economies are mostly influenced by France, as I said also. They all have a defense agreement, which means that in case of, external agreement, there will be a mutual support. Let's explain this more clearly. There is a defense agreement between all these countries, except from Nigeria, all Francophone countries with France. So in terms of, in case of attack, in case of war, it means that France can get involved and help bring support. So it is critical also to note that Niger is surrounded by some failed states. Failed state, because you see, I mentioned Libya. Libya is one of the neighbors, and Libya has been destroyed, has been invaded and bombed by NATO. I think in 2004, 2010 around, Libya has been destabilized politically by France and also by a joint, joint countries like, for example, America, Britain, France, so the NATO. So the NATO is basically the organization which destabilized Libya. And since then, Libya has been, is a failed state because it has triggered a lot of terrorism. So it is now a country which is a home country of many terrorist organizations like Islamic State, many other, terrorist groups are all operating in Libya, and also part of the desert between Niger, Mali, there are many organizations are there. So, as I said, the Chad is a neighbor country of Niger. Chad is affected by Boko Haram. Boko Haram is a terrorist group which is operating in between Nigeria. It's originated from Nigeria, but they're operating in Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. So all these terrorist groups, emerged after the destruction of Libya. So on the other side, between Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, that region is called Liptako Gourma. And that region is also heavily affected by terrorism. Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, that operated in that region. So now we can see a bit globally how Niger, the location of Niger and all the issues that Niger is facing. Terrorism between Niger and Mali, Burkina Faso, terrorism in Libya, and all the borders between Niger and Algeria is not safe because terror groups and also gangsters who are operating there. So the drug dealers and whatever you can imagine, in terms of gangsters that operate in that region as well. So you have Boko Haram on the other side. So that's how Niger is surrounded by all these countries. So there is instability. But Niger is the only country in which terrorists did not settle in. It's the only country in which terrorists are not settled in. But if you go to Mali, Mali's, I think more than 70% of Mali were occupied by terrorists. So France is also in Mali, or was in Mali. France was in Burkina Faso. More than 70% of Burkina also is affected by terrorist groups. So in the meanwhile, Niger has military agreements with America. So there are 4 military bases in Niger from America, 3 military bases from France, 1 military base from Italy and Germany. So you can see that Niger is basically home to NATO. All NATO forces are present in Niger. So when they got involved in this region, because those who were the French bases, military, which was in Burkina Faso and Mali, were dismissed by those countries, and they came and settled in Niger. So Nigerian people from Niger believed that with the presence of all these forces, they will be secure, they will be protected from terrorism. That's what people believed at the beginning, and that was what was sold also by the government. But unfortunately, after more than 10 years of the presence of NATO in Niger, people were still killed. People are being displaced from the villages. More than 600 military personnel from Niger have been killed. So people start asking, what's the point of having all these countries, all the Western countries, external forces in Niger, but instead of being protected, people are being killed, terrorists are still operating. So it reached a stage where, the killings, even yesterday, for instance, they killed 17 soldiers, even yesterday. So the whole region of Tillabéri, the western part of Niger, is completely devastated by terrorists. So many people ask, despite the high technologies, the drones, sophisticated weapons, which the Western countries, Western forces, present in Niger have, but Niger is still facing all these issues. So that's the problem. So as I said, the Niger people believe that with the heavy military presence of France and America, people will be protected. But unfortunately, the killing is still going on. People start asking if the West actually present in Niger does not have another agenda. There must be an hidden agenda. The impression is that all these forces are just there for the natural resources, for the uranium, because Niger is one of the biggest, producers of uranium, and uranium is vitally important to France, to get the industry moving. And with the energy crisis since the war of Ukraine and Russia, so France relies heavily on Niger, on that uranium, but unfortunately, that's not benefiting the local population. So while France is using that uranium to get the industry moving and even selling the energy, but Niger, more than 90% of Niger people are in darkness. They don't have, clean water. They don't have energy. They don't have practically nothing. So the countries getting poorer every day. That's basically, that's what people start showing, that they're fed up with this situation, so they start seeing France and all those countries as external forces, as imperial forces. So they start asking if the purpose of those countries is not just to colonize them. That's the first impression. But in the meanwhile, the regime which was in power had a leadership crisis because of bad governance, embezzlement was going on, and the president, the post-president even said once that the terrorists are more strong, more experienced than the local soldiers. That was seen as an insult. And also, more than 78 billions of local francs were allocated to buying weapons, which that money has been embezzled, has been taken by politicians. So no one knows where that money is gone. So is a feeling of general fed up, basically. So it's in the middle of these issues that the coup d'etat emerged. The coup d'etat happened on the 26th of July. So that's why, in the first instance, when people came to know that coup d'etat happened, they just supported massively the local the military. So the military, the current military has more than 80% of local people support, because they think that they thought that the president actually just got the external forces, involved in Niger just to protect themselves. So, and now, as you know, the ECOWAS has threatened, Niger military to reinstate the president, the deposed president, otherwise the country will be attacked militarily. So right now, the negotiations, the talks, summits, organized to see how they can intervene to reinstate, the deposed president, which we all know will be impossible, to be honest, because if the whole army now teamed up against the deposed president, even if he comes back, how are you going to lead? With which army? This will be a problem. So this will maybe lead to a bloodbath. But fact is that the local population, is supporting the military. So invading, for example, as they plan to do it, invading Niger will be a catastrophe, because this will inflame the whole region. Nigeria will be affected. Libya will be affected, is affected already. Algeria will be affected. So this may destabilize the whole region. And also, as you know, the desert, through the desert, many immigrants, refugees will be coming to Europe. So potentially, any war against Niger may have devastating, consequences. So that's what I want to say. And as you can see, the feeling of people now is that Niger, in fact, France, is a colonial power in Niger, which is just there to, to use and overuse resources. They're not interested actually in the welfare of people, but they just want to grab, as much as they can, the natural resources, which means uranium, the oil, and the gold of Niger. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Sahidi. That was a really inspiring sort of teaching about the situation in Niger. Let's all give Professor a warm round of applause. I forget we're not in person, so no one can see you clap, but you feel free to add your emoji reacts and things like that, and pop a message in the chat if there's anything you wanted to say. As usual, please keep your questions coming. Oh, lots of thank yous there. It was really interesting to sort of hear the context of Niger and how this isn't just something that sprung up randomly, which seems to be what a lot of our Western mainstream media seems to be pushing this narrative that it's completely isolated from all other events in the world, when actually, you know, this is an ongoing issue that stems back to the colonial era. I did see a statistic the other day that said something like, I believe, I think this was reported by Publish What You Pay Niger, and was published in a press release by Oxfam in 2013, that in France, 1 of every 3 light bulbs is lit thanks to Nigerian uranium. And that according to the World Bank in 2019, all of Niger's uranium exports were bound exclusively to France. So it just goes to show that, as the professor was saying, there is definitely a monopoly at play here, which disenfranchises the Nigerian people. And this is why it's so important for us to come together to learn all of these facts, and not to just to take what we see in the media and sometimes even in our textbooks for granted. There's always something more, especially when it comes to the global south and the ravaging of the imperialists. So thank you so much again, Professor, for sharing your expertise and your analysis with us.
Thank you.
We will now be moving on to our next wonderful speaker, who is Myriam Kane. Myriam, are you there? Amazing. So Myriam is, should need no introduction really at this point for the Black Liberation Alliance. Myriam is one of the co-founders of the Black Liberation Alliance. She is a London-based PASTEF activist who has been involved in calling solidarity protests for Senegal, for Africa, and for Pan-Africanism, and has recently gotten back from Senegal, where she originates from. She was a member of the NUS National Executive Committee and the NUS Black Students Campaign Committee, as well as being a pivotal core member of the anti-colonial Goldsmiths anti-racist occupation in 2019, one of the longest running occupations in the United Kingdom. So I'll leave you to take it away, Myriam.
Thank you. We meet at a moment that is exciting, energizing, and terrifying all at once. Exciting because across the Sahel, a wind of change is sweeping that has the potential to undo the neo-colonial legacy of imperialism. And at the same time, it is terrifying because victory is by no means certain when those you are up against hold power and military might. My family and I are from Senegal, and I have seen at first hand how imperialism blatantly exploits our people. Here are some examples of the control that French capitalism has on us. France has an economic stranglehold on our banking system, owning 2 of the 3 largest banks. France control our currency, the CFA, franc CFA, how we call it. France African nation must hold at least 50% of their national reserves in Paris, with France holding veto and voting power in the central banks of West and Central Africa. Our high streets and infrastructures are full of French-owned businesses. Our motorways are built by a French company and we have to pay a toll to use them. This means we have to pay for our own motorways and we will not own this road for years. Capitalism is running rampant in France's neo-colonial project in Africa. Senegal is rich in gold. Could you imagine if Britain was rich in gold and all the gold mine here was taken straight to an oil field and flown straight to Africa, leaving the average British person poor? That is the situation with France and Senegal. France has one of the biggest gold. He's one of the richest country with gold without owning one gold mine. Our gold is taken to an oil field with armed guard and flown straight to France. Reversing this unjust system means equality for Senegal. But equality of Senegal means France losing it all, because France is built on the resources and exploitation of Africa. Therefore, there is a lot to lose for not just France, but also for the West and for the old guard in power in Africa. That is why you are seeing them using every means possible to keep the old order which benefits them. I'm proud to have organized protests to defend Niger from military intervention, which is threatened by the Western puppets in ECOWAS, the likes of Macky Sall and Ouattara. The West and its ally want military intervention because they consider Niger to be one coup too many. If Mali, Guinea-Bissau, Conakry, Burkina Faso, and Niger manage to break with neo-colonialism, other states will follow. And that is why we all must show our solidarity and support for the coup leadership and stand against military intervention. A war in Africa is the last thing we need. But even today, we are seeing ramping up of the military threat, with the majority of ECOWAS countries saying they are ready to participate in a standby force that could intervene into Niger. It is inspiring to see Burkina Faso, Mali, and Algeria say that invasion in Niger would be an act of war against them. On Monday, the African Union has shown itself to be at odds with ECOWAS as its Peace and Security Council rejected the ECOWAS proposal for military intervention. Shamefully, President Macky Sall has said that Senegal troops will join with ECOWAS regarding Niger. The Ivory Coast is also pushing for military intervention. So to some extent, is Bola in Nigeria. They do not want a diplomatic solution, which Burkina Faso is proactively seeking. Instead, the Western agenda risks sparking a war in Africa that could engulf the entire continent, as Dr. Sahidi has mentioned. And in Senegal, our protest movement originates from the same principles and belief as this coup. We want France out of Africa. Our resources should be used for the people, not for the imperial West and its puppets. We are facing a brutal crackdown for daring to stand up against Macky Sall and those that are in power. We have over 1,060 people are now political prisoners. Over 100 people have lost their lives in protesting against Macky Sall. And I dare to remind that the coup in Burkina Faso haven't seen one person killed. But the institutional coup, this is what they're doing. They're killing people for daring to stand for their right or exercising their institutional right of protest. The opposition party, the party that I'm part of, PASTEF, has been dissolved. Its leader, Ousmane Sonko, was on course, leading the poll. He is extremely loved and supported by the people, not to just mention the young people, but by the people. He was heading the polls ahead of the 2024, February 2024 election. He's now today, hospitalized in intensive care at the military hospital principal in Dakar. Following his imprisonment, the internet has been cut, social media platforms have been restricted, all designed to stop any decent action against the government. And we do believe that France is behind all this because we have been hearing the fact that after losing Mali, after losing Burkina Faso, after losing Guinea Conakry, France would put, Macron has his life on the line to not lose Ivory Coast and Senegal. And truth be told, if this coup of Niger do succeed, if the Niger people do win against the imperialists, is to them a sign that basically they will be losing Senegal and they will be losing Ivory Coast, because people are saying no more. Over 50% of the population of Senegal is aged between 15 and 24. The youth movement in Senegal is vibrant and active. Many of the protesters were born between 2000 and 2002. This gives you an idea of ages of the young people who are putting their life on the line to shake things up and make a change. It is tragic that I get text messages from Senegal telling me young people have died from the bullet wound. We have seen some people being tortured by police. We have also seen people being killed and just thrown in the sea without their families knowing where they are. All these people, they were shot by the military police, which is the gendarmerie, which is yet another colonial another colonial tool that we have inherited from the French. And these people all were shot or they were killed by taking part in the protest movement. Africa is rich in its resources, but its people are poor because of the role of the West and the impact of France looting us. And when the West and its allies dare to say that they are calling for democracy, let's not forget that such argument were used in the catastrophic invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. If human rights and democracy is so valued when it comes to African lives, let us look at the human price that refugees from Africa pay for daring to want to come to the West. 63 Senegalese refugees are feared dead after boat capsized off Cape Verde. 4 weeks ago, 300 people were reported missing and are feared dead after leaving Senegal in boat going towards Spain. It is shameful that Britain is not welcoming refugees, engages in a hateful Stop the Boats campaign. You cannot stop refugees risking their life and crossing seas without stopping the causes that is the economic destabilization caused by imperialism. And once our community get to the West, we are subjected to horrific racism. Earlier this year, days of protest and unrest took place in France following the killing of 17-year-old Nahel Merzouk, who was shot dead by the French police. He was of Algerian and Moroccan descent. People of African descent make up the majority of those shot by the police in France. And dare I to say, while they are still there, we will be here. Unless they leave our continent, leave our resources, treat us with dignity and respect, we will be coming here. And that's just a fact. That's just how it is. With the coup and protests in Africa today, we are seeing a horrific historic movement, and we are seeing a collective unity which is defying the very central principle of empire, divide and rule. This is how the British Empire was built. This is how neo-colonialism continues. What Africa is proving right now is Sahel region is that we unite. We are in with a chance that the empire can finally dismantle. I'm going to be ending this with this word, which is it's extremely important that the days to come that we show extreme solidarity with the people of Sahel, but also with the people in West Africa, Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea Conakry, and so on, because we're going to be seeing some really historic times, but also very hard time that will affect us in a way. So we can only show for solidarity, whether it's protest, whether to be on Twitter debunking, whether being on social media debunking some of the Western media propaganda that we'll be seeing a lot, but also showing up to demo, showing up to events, organizing demo. I'm actually happy to see a lot of people are coming from the US, from Canada, and from Belgium, from all these countries. This is a historic time where our internationalism and our international politics mean more than ever is to show up and show out and get organized as the only way for us to bring change. As we will know, a lot of our people back home that are fighting will be silenced, won't have access to certain restriction and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm just going to end it here, as I know there's going to be a good Q&A for discussion, and I know a lot of people will have a lot of input to say. Thank you so much for turning up and for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Myriam. Let's all give Myriam a wonderful round of emoji applause. Never get used to saying things like that. So important, the subjects you tackled there, and especially in connecting the struggles between what's going on in Senegal and what's going on in Niger with, what's been going on in France, in Algeria, in sort of the UK. The whole fiasco with the so-called Bibi Stockholm, the fact that they're putting refugees on a quite literal boat, sitting on the docks, when they haven't tested for the Legionella bacteria, where there are people who are being put into cramped and unsafe living and working conditions. The fact that, there are refugee boats trying to come to this country every day because of exactly what you laid out, the conditions that led them to come here. They're entirely created of our own volition. They're created by France, they're created by Britain, they're created by the United States and all the imperialist countries. And it's so important that we remember that when we show solidarity with refugees, with migrants, with asylum seekers, that we also have to remember, as much as it sometimes can feel like good to be part of the solution, we also have to remember we are in the belly of the beast. We do have the power and the privilege here to be able to protest these things, to be able to challenge the systems in place that enable these colonial relations to matter, to continue onwards. And thank you so much for everyone in the chat for your lovely comments. Please continue to drop them in and let us know what you think. Let us know if there's anything new you've learned today, anything you want to share with people in the chat, or things you have learned. I know there's a million and one statistics that we could pull out about the grievous impact of colonialism. But unfortunately, we do not have, if we were to do that, I think we'd be here for years and years. So last but not least, I'll be introducing the wonderful Michael Wongsam, who will be our final speaker before we go on to our sort of discussion panel. I'm seeing a number of really lovely, good questions in the Q&A box, so now is the opportunity to get them in. And just to introduce Michael, Michael Wongsam has been a Black community and anti-fascist activist since the 1970s. He's a founding member of the Labour Party Black sections, which was instrumental in delivering the first Black MP in the UK Parliament, including the first Black woman MP, Diane Abbott. Mike is also a writer on race and class, specializing internationally, and has written extensively about the United States, Haiti, and other countries. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to teach us.
Okay, thank you, Fiona, and I'd like to say thank you to the organizers, the Black Liberation Alliance, for inviting me to say a few words to you. I would like to pick up on the point which Myriam left off on in the fact that she said that what is happening now in the Sahel is historic, and I would like to amplify that. I think that, I want to talk about in general the African Revolution and Pan-Africanism, and to situate what's happening at the moment in West Africa to the overall contours of the African Revolution as that has unfolded. But first of all, I want to say that many people have said that, well, this is a military coup. They have even come around and said that is a military coup launched because Traini was going to be sacked by Bazoum, and that's the reason why he launched the coup. I want to address that particular thing first of all, and that's because, well, first of all, France has launched 122 military interventions in Africa between 1960 and the 1990s. That's a hell of a lot of military interventions, and so when it comes to people preaching about democracy, they should be careful of their own history. It's not the important thing is it's not the method of the transfer of power which is important, but the content, what's happening, what is being transferred to what. Imperialism has infinitely greater control over the information space in a lot of the global South countries. In fact, in virtually all of the countries in the global South, it makes it more difficult for anti-imperialist forces to dominate the discourse. We think in the left, in this country and in the United States and throughout Europe. But in the left, we find it difficult. How much more difficult do you think it would be if you were in the global South, where everything, all of the means of propaganda, of distributing the narrative, of controlling the narrative, of handling and managing the discourse, is all owned by imperialism. And wherever anti-imperialist forces have attained widespread popular support, and have even led to the election of progressive governments, they have been overturned by the most ruthless methods to restore their own people to power. So let's talk about, therefore, the African Revolution. Everybody knows that decolonization started in the 1950s, 1960s. At that time, the proximal task in the African Revolution was to secure and consolidate political sovereignty over the former colonial states. However, and this was mentioned by Nkrumah himself, is that political independence with economic dependence is inherently contradictory. And this contradiction, therefore, leads to contradictory tendencies within the ruling elites. So therefore, the contradictory tendencies basically boil down to the fact that there are certain factions within the ruling elites which have their ties to imperialism and want to maintain the links with imperialism because that's the way that they realize their power. And there are other factions within the ruling elites which have a nationalist outlook, want to break the chains which bind them to imperialism and to chart an independent course. And there's these contradictions which the colonial powers can exploit to promote their compliant forces and to suppress the oppositional forces, and thereby to oversee their continued economic exploitation against the national forces that want to bring an end to that exploitation. So the ascending curve of the African Revolution, which moves and begins with Nkrumah, Sekou Lumumba, rises through the armed struggle of conducted by forces like the MPLA, Frelimo, ending with another coup in Burkina Faso led by Thomas Sankara, etc. After that, however, there is a descending curve where imperialism launched counter coups, murdered the leaders of the nationalist forces like Lumumba, Sankara, etc., launched a counter-armed struggle against Frelimo by Renamo, all of those kinds of things, murdered Lumumba, dissolved his body in acid, all of these things the imperialists turned to. And what facilitated this was that because the nationalist struggle was assisted by the Soviet bloc and by China, who were both engaged in Africa, the descent was accelerated after the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the retreat of China due to the rapprochement with the United States in the era of reform and opening up. Therefore, the choices which faced Africa at that point in time, and in particular the nationalist forces, were greatly diminished. And the nationalist forces which managed to survive were greatly isolated. And so I think that what's the situation today with the coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, I think it's safe to say that they happened because of the conditions which the previous speakers have outlined. That the imperialist military presence which has built over the past period of time, people have mentioned, the institution of AFRICOM, ostensibly in order to fight the rising tide of terrorism, but which have grown over the past period of time and have been instituted with the underlying the hidden agenda of fighting their geostrategic battles inside of Africa, in particular against the ascending involvement of both Russia and China, in particular in Africa. There's also the rapacious French imperialism, which has impoverished the people greatly over the past period of time. And Myriam has already discussed the business about the CFA franc, the colonial tax, the colonial pact, which was signed with the Francophone former colonies, which gave France essentially the controlling hand in their economies and their currencies. But the other factor, as I said before, is that there are now new partnerships which are possible with China and Russia. They are both possible and they are desirable. Now, say a few words about why they are possible and desirable. So first of all, let's remember the thing that, I mean, Thomas Sankara achieved many things in his very brief period as the leader of Burkina Faso. He instituted literacy campaigns, vastly improved the nation's health, and all of those type things that we associate with revolutionary leaders. He also raised the question within the African Union of the burgeoning debt, which plague African countries and is a great factor in stopping their development. Well, one of the products of the recent Russia-Africa summit, which was attended by 49 representations from 49 different countries, was that Russia cancelled $23 billion worth of debt. In other words, the great campaign which Thomas Sankara raised, and which was taken up very actively by Fidel Castro, both in the non-aligned movement and in the United Nations General Assembly, that has now started to be met. And it's not met by the West, it's met by Russia. Also, China has relieved the outstanding debts of over 20 countries previously. Furthermore, China's foreign direct investment in Africa overtook that of the United States in 2012 and has widened the gap systematically ever since. Chinese companies accounted for 31% of African infrastructure contracts valued at $50 million or more in 2022, compared with 12% for Western firms. So in all that, when it comes to building roads and bridges and railways and all the rest of it, it's China which is accomplishing that. And we know that investment in infrastructure is what is required to stimulate economic activity. In sub-Saharan Africa, Chinese infrastructure projects totaled $155 billion over the past 2 years. And by contrast, the richest country in the world, total US foreign direct investment in Africa came to $44.8 billion in 2021. So you can see the difference between the engagement of China in the economic development of Africa and the engagement of the United States. In fact, it's safe to say that the United States' engagement in Africa is to fight its geostrategic battles with Russia and China in Africa, and not to any great extent to oversee any development within Africa itself. And furthermore, African countries have entered into military partnerships and agreements with Russia, particularly in terms of countering the terrorism threat. And as was said before by the previous speakers, the terrorism threat is a big matter in West Africa, following the debacle of the destruction of Libya as a result of the NATO war, which was conducted there. and which ended up with Libya becoming a failed state. And incidentally, not a small part, because of the fact that Gaddafi was in fact proposing to launch a currency which is not under the control of the West and which is backed by gold, which Africa has, as people pointed out previously, Africa has very great resources in gold. And so I think that was one of the reasons that they had to see the end of the Gaddafi government. And so we can say that there's a difference between the approach between the United States on the one hand, the West on the one hand, and China and Russia on the other. The West seeks geostrategic advantage in its engagement with Africa, whereas China increasingly Russia seeks mutually advantageous win-win partnerships with African countries. So I'd just like to finish up now on a discussion of Pan-Africanism, because I think this is something that we need to get absolutely correct. In the past, a lot of people have written about Pan-Africanism as though it would be a good idea for Africa to unite, as though because all African peoples need to show solidarity rather than hostility towards each other. All of these kinds of things, and people have therefore pointed out that, well, Africa is balkanized, even within the balkanized countries which were a result of colonization, is that there are different tribes, different local interests, and all of the rest of it, and which makes it very difficult. Well, I think that that completely misses the point, because, as I said before, the first proximal task of the African Revolution was to secure political independence, political sovereignty. The second proximal task wasn't achieved. In other words, the economic subordination to the West continued, and that was outlined by Nkrumah when he named it neo-colonialism. So he's the first person that came up with that particular designation. So therefore, the second proximal task is actually to gain economic independence. Now, since all of the countries of Africa, formally speaking, have political independence, even though we know that very, very large strings are pulled by imperialism behind the scenes, economic independence they don't have. And that is the next step. And when we see, therefore, from the things which have been said by the leaderships of all of these places in West Africa, which have seen the transition of power, whether or not it's in the form of a military coup, it doesn't make any difference. What they've said is that they want, first of all, they want France out of their country. They want the French military, because they're not doing any good. The Russian military is better. In the Central African Republic, they've constructed and erected monuments to the Wagner organization in commemoration of their exploits in fighting terrorism. So that's the situation that we see there. They want France out. Secondly, as Myriam said, the fact that Africa is resource rich, that Niger in particular produces a very large proportion of France's electricity in terms of its export of uranium, while at the same time, well over 80% of households in Niger have no access to electricity whatsoever, and the electricity that Niger does have is imported from Nigeria. So I think that's the farcical nature of the thing. Is that I think it's correct to say that Mali has proposed that the licensing of the mines should be re-looked at. Currently in Niger, for instance, they get 5% of the profits from the French-owned and operated mines. It is retained in Niger. 95% goes to France. I think that therefore that what Mali is saying is that ratio is far too low, and that they need to look against it. But I think that the basic thing is that Africa is very resource rich in terms of its natural resources, but I think its economic subordination to imperialism means that the value is exported to the West, and the economy is underdeveloped because there is no industrial transformation which arises out of what is dug up out of the ground. There's no industrial transformation within Africa, and so it's economic subordination to imperialism has meant that it's not been able to effect an industrial transformation on the basis of the natural resources it has. And balkanization, which resulting from colonialism, presents a very real problem. Also, the alienation of the land and the resources of Africa also presents a real problem. And there is only one way to address that particular problem. The alienation of the land and resources is to expropriate the expropriators. The land and resources has to be seized. The mines in Niger, which are owned and operated by French companies, have to be taken into public control and ownership in exactly the same way that Hugo Chavez did with Venezuela's oil industry. That is exactly the way to take control of your resources. And then Pan-Africanism itself, therefore, presents a way of replacing the old chains of exploitation with new relationships of solidarity and commerce of African countries, one with the other. So instead of the main relationships being between Niger and France, the main relationships ought to be between Niger and Burkina Faso and Nigeria and Chad and Algeria, though with its neighbors, for instance. So that is the thing. The last thing I want to say is that if this vision can be made real, if building on the political independence, if African countries manage to break the chains which bind them to imperialism and to form new relationships with each other, and on the basis of adding value to the resources which are extracted from the ground or grown from the earth and all the rest of it, they are able to effect an industrial transformation. So just think, Africa's 1.3 billion people and is rich in resources. China has 1.4 billion people and India has 1.4 billion people. They are the most successful emerging economies. Africa, the median age in Africa is 18.8 years. Africa has a very, very young population. And so therefore that's an added advantage in comparison to other places around the world. So I think it's fair to say that if its resources can be seized back, if the expropriators can be expropriated, and if Africa can form a unified economic confederation, whereby in time, I mean, both in China and India are export-driven countries, but when times are bad, they can fall back onto developing their internal economies, their internal market, because they have such vast internal markets. Well, if Africa took advantage of the fact that it has 1.3 billion people and a very young population, it too, when times are bad, can fall back on developing its internal market. In fact, its internal market is the thing which is most underdeveloped. So I just want to finish there and say that Africa has the potential to become an economic superpower of the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Mike. That was really invigorating and certainly some food for thought on what our role is in sort of supporting this vision and being in solidarity with the current anti-imperialist struggles. Because you're absolutely right. You know, we have to look back to the revolutionaries of the past and what happened there, and to look toward the future and what revolutions are to come. And to echo what Myriam was saying, you know, it's it's exciting times, but it's also, you know, it's hard. It's going to be difficult. It's going to require I guess the blood, sweat, and tears of all of us in solidarity with each other, whether we're in Niger or Senegal or France or the United States. We all have our part to play in revolution, and we all have a part to play in stopping the spread of misinformation and disinformation in the West. Everything you were saying about sort of Russia and how Russia is valued as sort of like a military partner in all of these really sort of makes me think about all the news articles I've been seeing recently about how, you know, Russia this, Russia that, Wagner this, Wagner that, perpetuating all these sort of stereotypes of why we need to be cautious of the Russians. And it really does play into the current rhetoric around Ukraine, Russia as well. But at the end of the day, which countries are willing to partner with African countries? Which countries are willing to, you know, make deals that aren't based on political conditions and strings attached? And the truth of the matter is, it's not France, it's not the US, it's not the UK. So thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Myriam, and thank you, Professor, for sharing all of your expertise and knowledge with us today. I feel like I learned so much about past, present, future, just by listening to all of you, and I'm sure the others would say the same. Let's all give a very warm, I tried to mix two phrases there, a round of emoji applause, and our thanks to Michael, as well as Myriam and the Professor. We will now be sort of transitioning over to our Q&A period. Thank you so much for all of your amazing questions. We've got a really, really good chunk of questions for the three of you, so I hope you're prepared. In the chat, please keep your reactions, your thoughts, your comments coming. It's really great to hear from you and to hear sort of like your thoughts on the subject, your thoughts on, you know, as anti-imperialists, what it is we can be doing, what we should be doing, what groups we should be joining, how we can be organizing here in the West, in the diaspora, or back in the homeland, the motherland. So we will start with a question from Yuri. It's quite a lengthy question, so might want to get some pen and paper for this one. But it's a really good question around the subject of sort of, I guess, disinformation and figuring out who the truth tellers are in amongst all the discourse. So I will just paraphrase your question, Yuri. I hope that's all right. But ever since the military coups against the French and Western-backed governments and regimes have been ousted, what would you say about the, well, I guess the reportings that, you know, that the coup governments are sort of like really despicable, repressive, and monstrous regimes that have taken over the country and must be gotten rid of at all costs? And Yuri's curious about your response to sort of like all the, I guess, the propaganda being pushed at the moment about these coup governments and so-called military juntas. And in general, the coverage of Niger, what would you say to those so-called anti-war or peace activists who are on the fence as to how to respond to the recent coup in Niger, as well as the threats of the ousting of the new governments across the continent? I'll just repeat that again whilst you get your thoughts together. So the question is based around the theme of sort of myth busting and how to tell, how to, I guess, decipher fact from fiction, truth from lie within the discourse. So ever since the military coup against the French and Western-backed governments have been ousted, how would you respond, or what do you think about sort of the allegations that have been put forward about these military regimes being repressive, being monstrous and undemocratic, and needing to be sort of ousted at all costs for the quote-unquote sake of democracy? And the second part of the question was, what would you say to anti-war and peace activists who are on the fence as to how to respond to the recent coup in Niger, given the sort of given the depictions of, you know, this military junta coming in and, you know, ruining a whole country?
Okay, can I start?
Yes, please, Professor.
So the propaganda that the military regime is oppressive is really propaganda, because it has been just 2 weeks since they seized power, and no one has been killed, no one has been beaten. On the contrary, day by day, since France has shown interest in the previous government, since France wanted, the use of military intervention, the use of military power. So this has massively contributed to bring people together. And as I said before, more than 80% of the population is now supporting the military because they're fed up with poverty. They're fed up with the very bad living conditions, and also the fact that they've been killed every single day. Even yesterday, 17 military has been service, personnel have been killed yesterday. Many people have been displaced from the villages. Without even counting the civilians which have been killed yesterday. So how to comprehend, how to understand that in a country where you have NATO, because 4 military American military bases, 3 French military bases, Italy, Germany, Qatar, and all these forces are in Niger, and people still being killed. And how to understand that politicians, corrupt politicians, who between 10 years, 12 years, have become multi-billionaire, people who everyone knows them. They're the poor people, coming from poor family backgrounds, and suddenly they're multi-billionaires. So people, believe me, people are just supporting the military. The more pressure they put on military, the more support, the military gets from people. That's a fact. Now, what to do? I think it's very clear that any attack of Niger will inflame the whole region. Terrorists, that will be on the advantage of terrorists, because while armies will be, busy killing each other, terrorists can operate easily the way they want. Maybe the West can just pump, the uranium and the minerals and take them away, because there is no control anymore. So, exploitation will become more. So I think what is going on right now in Niger is not only concerning Niger, it concerns whole Africa. And if Niger fails, and if Niger is invaded, if Niger, doesn't succeed, I think this will be duplicated and replicated on all other countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, etc., etc. Yeah. So that's how I see it. And the more pressure they put on the military, and what they don't want to be to happen will happen. The Niger will go more closer to Russia. That's the fear. So I think it is in the interest of them not to put that much military threat. It is important to negotiate, to sit down and find a solution, maybe to come back to constitutional order. But I don't think this will happen with the reinstatement of the old regime. I don't think so, because even the population of Niger is not ready to accept it. So they need more support, and that's, look here, all Africa now, many Pan-Africanists, even around the world, people are supporting, because they understand that it doesn't make sense that one of the richest country in terms of natural resources is very poor. Nigerians should not be begging. Do you know that how many people have been dismissed from Senegal, from Niger? More than 600 people have been dismissed from Senegal. The beggars from Niger. Beggars from Niger who live in Algeria. Everywhere in Ivory Coast. Why? So this is a paradox. The richest country in West Africa, in terms of natural resources, is the poorest country. So I think unified fight is really important. This can only be achieved if people around the world, come together to say enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Really important words of warning, as well as a reminder to the potential implications of actual intervention and war in Niger. Myriam, Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Go on, Mike.
Yeah, go on, Mike. I'll go after.
Yes, on the question of, well, I mean, one of the things that imperialism always does, it says it's upholds human rights and democracy. But there is no basis in truth in this whatsoever. I mentioned before what they did with Lumumba, what they did with Sankara, all of those things. They deposed the democratically elected president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, while he was abroad on a trip to Vietnam, to North Vietnam. That's when they deposed him, because they know he's a popular person while he's there. They deposed him in a coup. Just, you know, I mean, the biggest thing that's happening in the world today is the war in Ukraine, obviously. The war in Ukraine came about because there was a coup in the Maidan Square in 2014, where they overturned the legitimately and popular president of Ukraine and put in place a stooge. In fact, everybody knows it, who follows social media, that Victoria Nuland, together with the American ambassador to Ukraine, chose who was going to form the government of Ukraine. So there is absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with democracy and human rights. In fact, all you have to do is to look at you know, when they were unable to get anybody elected in Venezuela that was to their liking, they tried to impose this person, Juan Guaido, as the president of Venezuela, because they couldn't get somebody their own person elected, so they imposed. And you know, the Venezuela's bank deposits in London, they'd have $1 billion worth of gold in London. They can't get their hands on it because London wants to give it to Juan Guaido. So I mean, and this is the situation. You only have to look at their track record and not believe what they write in the and say in the media. And so, in terms of the coup governments, I'm greatly encouraged by the statements that they've made. Is that they, first of all, they don't want to be controlled by imperialists. They don't want imperialist military forces on their territories, and they want proper control over their natural resources. That is a very good start. And if other countries in Africa tried to emulate that particular approach, then we would be in a better place. And I'm encouraged, actually, by the decision of the African Union not to support ECOWAS on this thing. And that's because there's not because you have nationalist forces in the leadership of these things. It's because of what they see happening in the world. So Museveni has, you know, when I see that the things that he's come out with, lambasting imperialism about their attitude towards Africa. This is because Africa has alternatives, and more African leaders are recognizing the fact that there's a choice. You don't have to go with imperialism. There are also alternatives, and they can choose where to go. And they can, and the fact that they can choose where to go, they can get a better deal out of it. So that's the thing there. The last thing about the anti-war and the peace activists, well, I think that this is something which is general in the Western left. Generally, is that that they are in the Western left because they don't have to. In fact, none of the Western left are in any form of government at all whatsoever, apart from maybe Portugal. They don't have to make choices, and in Portugal they can't because they are members of the EU. But they don't have to make choices in the same way that countries in the global South now can make choices in whom they partner. So the Western left, I think, they have really an impoverishment of their outlook on the situation, in that they end up tail ending their own ruling classes instead of charting an independent line and trying to ask themselves, what is the reality? What is the reality? What is the social consequences of what's taking place? So I think that the place to look for progressive forces is not in the imperialist countries, it's in the global south.
I just want to add one point, if you don't mind. You know, the deposed president actually has not been elected, as many people said, but selected. Because before even the general elections, France has already, confirmed him as president. You know, while many politicians were in prison, Macron came to Niger to say that, the regime is democratic. But while many opposition leaders were in prison, many have been even, dismissed from the country. So you can see the legitimacy is not from local people, but your obedience to, foreign forces. And usually, if they say a president is good, it means that he is not good for his people. That's simple. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Myriam.
Yeah, like me, I guess, thank you. I think Professor Sahidi and Michael have said most of the stuff. I guess I'm gonna come to tell you specifically what's happening in the ground within the diaspora and back home, as I'm part of one of those I'm part in one of the people that are organizing most of this actions. We have seen, for example, in Niger, right after the coup, there was a huge celebration for the military. People went actually in a base where the Bazoum political party was, and they did what they did. But yeah, there is huge God, English is gone. Sorry. There is a huge
demonstration.
Yeah, there is huge support for the military. And when it comes down to the anti-imperialist movement in general, people in across Senegalese people, for example, in France, have been having weekly consistent demo every Saturday in Place de la République, which is huge in Paris. And then you have people, and this is across France, and which they all attended by African people. They have, we have had a demo here as well. All these demos are attended by Black and brown people, but mostly by African people. They are there massively. There was a demo last week as well, again in Italy, which was huge in Milan, where they had to close a whole road. That I was born in Italy, and I'd never seen that. I had never seen many African people in one road, many Black people in one road, and I was born in Italy. Yeah, and then here as well in the UK, we have been consistently organizing demos twice a week. And again, it was Black people. Before the coup in Niger happened, actually, the demonstration we were organizing for Senegal, it was the president of the Niger organization, actually, that was printing us some flyers, was printing us some placards. It's just to show the move, the solidarity that is with us. I walk outside, I speak to my son in Wolof, and you have a Ivorian. I was like, oh my God, you're Senegalese. The first thing they say to me, they talk about me, is Sonko. They talk about Ousmane Sonko. I was like, yeah, he's the hope of a future Pan-Africanist movement. Yeah, he's the hope. And that just to show how the people in the diaspora are glued on, how the people of the diaspora are ready to give it their all to fight imperialism and to fight France Dégage. For example, a lot of people that I organize with against the France CFA movement is people that I went to school with in Senegal, it's people that I grow up with, that live in France, and we are the one leading alongside other people, this movement really. So yeah, like ultimately, if you do listen to if you wait on the white left, yes, you will feel like nothing is being said. I'm gonna be specific on that. But the Black people, the Pan-Africanists are on the road. The demo we organized last week, a lot of Pan-Africanists are still reaching out to us. What we're doing next, what is happening. Not only Pan-Africanists, also people from Haiti, from the Caribbean, from Antigua, from Martinique, from Jamaica. A lot of people are getting in touch to see, oh, what's next? How can we show solidarity? It's not the white left, but it's the Black people and the Black and brown people that are out there. Yeah, and also Mélenchon has been supportive very much of Sonko as well on Twitter. If you look, also weekly, daily, there are Twitter spaces happening about Niger, and most of those Twitter spaces are hosted by people that are from Niger, Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, Senegal. We are the one hosting these Twitter spaces, these educational spaces, or these debatable spaces. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add. Like, the movement is out there. It's just if we do look at in certain spaces, we won't find it there. But people are mobilizing, people are getting organized, people are talking about it, people are educating as well. That's all I wanted to add. Sorry, longer.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you for that. I think it's really important for all of us to recognize that, you know, white left spaces, they aren't the be all and end all of organizing. And as Myriam is emphasizing, there's so many Pan-African Black liberation organizing spaces, and there have been for post the sort of the unstable destabilization in Niger, but pre that as well, before, because the movements, they've been here, they've been going. It's just the news is only, it chooses what it chooses to report and pick up on. And thank you for that question. Gonna move on to one. Actually, this flows really nicely into what you were just talking about, Myriam. But we've got a question here about sort of, well, again, I'll do my best to paraphrase it. It's from an anonymous attendee, about French colonialism not being sort of widely taught, and if it is taught, that there's a notion that France is a kinder and more benevolent sort of colonizer to its colonial subjects, unlike the British. And this person is saying, you know, they sometimes people get surprised when they find out that a lot of the affluent, rich African diaspora are supportive of neo-colonialism or recycle propaganda. And they're just sort of wondering how do you feel the response of French people of a Nigerian descent, or of any African backgrounds of former French colonies are, yeah, what's the sort of, I guess, what's the general response? Has there been any sort of like pushback? Do you feel like, you know, as you just expressed, do you feel like there's a very strong anti-imperialist sentiment? And I think this person is just curious to know the sort of like response in the diaspora, in particular, the French diaspora.
I guess I can answer that, maybe just to elaborate.
Yeah.
Yeah, like regarding the French diaspora, again, as I said earlier, a lot of, for example, the people that started most of the party that I'm part of in Senegal, Pastif, is people in the diaspora. We are the one putting our money into it. We are the one supporting people that are back home. We are the one supporting the family of wounded. We are the one starting campaign on, we're really using our privilege, which is like, okay, we can protest a bit in peace and not being killed to an extent. And so therefore we're utilizing those privileges we have, where we're putting our money and our time, our energy in organizing and mobilizing and supporting people back home that are actually protesting as well. For example, a group of people are supporting people that got killed or people that are wounded during the protest, and is most of the people, there are people that are on the ground, but also people that are in the diaspora. We also, obviously everywhere there is a 0.5 of bourgeoisie that like their little sort of privileges they have, and they're ready to, you know, go over the 99% of people to really kill the movement. But what I can say is majority of the people, the majority of the people are really supportive of all this anti-imperialist movement. Again, I think what you said about French education system is true. I, as someone that study, part of my curriculum was a French curriculum. I guess is very important to see, for example, some of the works are being done to change that. When you look at Burkina Faso the other day, while getting ready for the start of school, they have changed the school uniform to the Burkina Faso style of kente. That's the only way I can explain it in English that makes sense, if you know what kente is, which is the national gown, some of it to mix it for the school uniform. But also there are some lefty organizations that have actually also show support, like the Socialist Party and the Communist Party has condemned the Niger coup. Jean-Luc Mélenchon has said nothing, neither condemning nor upsetting, but has denounced neo-colonialism and the mad warmongerism of Macron. He has criticized the fact that Parliament, regarding the National Assembly and the Senate, can't have a discussion on that because on the 5th constitution, only the president can decide who go to war. But also, as I said earlier, Mélenchon does support Sonko in his program and denounces his arrest a lot on Twitter. The extreme left, like the NPA and Revolution Permanente, have good line on the coup as well. There are some good ultimately, there are some good lefty groups that are actually in support of things. And also, when you look at, that's all I wanted to say. There are some good, but also look at some of the organization. TBLA does share a lot of the work is being done in the ground online and stuff. So you can look at some of the facts we share there. Just having to look. You just need to look at the right places. Sorry, I'm mumbling now. I'm going to shut up.
All good, all good. Professor Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add on to what Myriam's already said?
Yeah, Michael. Okay. In terms of raising awareness, I think we're trying to, to organize conferences, debates, and for example, I gave had 2 interviews with international TV channels like CNN International. So I had an interview with them, and also TRT, which is the Turkish TV channel world. So to try to explain, but what we need is a proper, like a forum like this one, where we can, have more time to debate and to explain what's going on. Because there are a lot of propaganda right now going on RFI, Radio France International, and also on France 24, they twist the reality. For instance, after the military seized the power, more than 30,000 people, gathered spontaneously in the stadium. But saying on RFI that these people have been paid. Russia even gave them money. Why can Russia give all these people money? 30,000 people. So this is propaganda. Or people have been forced to come and demonstrate. That's not true. Because just people are very, very poor and impoverished. Every single person can feel it in the own body. If you don't have, you live on $1 a day or less than $1. That's a fact. Some people have just 1 meal a day. Electricity, don't even mention that they don't have it at all. It's a luxury. So that's what things which, I don't have words to translate really what people are going through. Every time I go, for example, I was scheduled to go on the 1st of August. It didn't work. 7th, I couldn't go. But I know what's going on there. Your meal, you can't share your meal. You know, your lunch. You have to share it with people. You know, so it's really sad.
Thank you for your contribution. Professor Michael, did you have anything? Yeah, all right, lovely. So we'll go on to, so those were some of the 2 longer questions. I'm just going to group up the next few questions. So I'm going to do 2 for this next round, so feel free to take notes. So the first one, the first question of the 2 is by Alvin. Alvin asks, so the China debt trap narrative is very effective, especially within the Western left. How effective is it in African countries? The second question from Leila is sort of question perhaps from Michael about the continuation and escalation of violence and terrorism on the African continent due to the nature of the shrinking natural resources and reserves due to climate change. Do you think we're going to be seeing more fragility, more instability, more debt, and as a result, more violence? So the first question was about the debt trap narrative. The second question was about the impact of climate change and the shrinking natural resources contributing to potential violence and terrorism. Would anyone like to go first? Was that a nod, Michael? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think the this debt trap narrative isn't working in Africa. If you look at I do follow social media, not avidly, but I do follow it, and I've been struck actually by the number of posts that I've seen where, you know, we've had all of these delegations from the West coming to Africa, telling them not to get involved with China. You know, you'll be trapped in debt and all the rest of it. And actually, to my amazement, a lot of the African leaders have actually lectured these delegations not to tell them what they can do in their own country. And first of all, and secondly, I mean, there was one very, very famous clip that I saw where an official from Germany came into a conference center which was built by China, and they came to lecture the people not to get involved with China. This was in the conference center which was built by China. So I think it's not working. I think that the people are beginning to wake up. For one thing, the debt trap narrative is not true, and they always come back to the Sri Lanka Hanbantota port, which wasn't a debt trap narrative. Sri Lanka couldn't make the debt service payments, and so China took a long lease on the port. That's it. That's not no debt trap thing. It'll return to Sri Lanka, but in the meantime, China will be operating the port. I don't see anything whatsoever which is wrong with that, and it's unlike the Western countries where, first of all, to get a loan you have to. So for instance, in Sri Lanka, where they had and still have very severe problems to get an IMF loan, the IMF was demanding that they sell off their national airline, and those kinds of things. So they want privatization of assets and all of those kinds of things. But when China comes and offers debts on good terms, and sometimes, I mean, it's obviously the case that sometimes countries can't keep up the debt servicing and things like that, that China has been known to cancel the debt or reschedule the debt or do things like they did with the Hanbantota port. They try to enable the country to find a solution, and if a solution can't be found, they cancel the debt. That's not unknown with Western institutions. So you have to look behind the narrative and at the propaganda which it really represents.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to come in on that question, or Mike, you're free to answer the other question regarding climate change as well, as you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we should expect that there will be very severe consequences to climate change, because I mean we're seeing the effects of climate change at the moment in we saw it in roads, we're seeing it in the United States, we're seeing it in Australia, and we will see devastating effects of climate change in Africa. And Africa is at the moment, it's in a position, I mean, people have already said what the conditions are. So for instance, in Niger, the gross national income per capita is $590. That's less than $2 a day. Those are the conditions. And so when you get drought, shortage of water and things like that is going to have very severe consequences. Violence is something, I mean, there are civil wars going on at the moment in Africa, in Sudan, in Ethiopia. So there are very major civil wars, and in fact, in Ethiopia, it's been going on for quite some time. First of all, with the TPLF, and now they have civil war with these other provinces. So I'm afraid that it's going to become a big problem. And you can only hope, therefore, that the forces, which is represented by the coup governments which we have in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, though the forces of that type are the ones which come to the fore and provide pan-African solutions to things, rather than the solutions which are currently being displayed in various places in Africa. At the end of the day, there has to be some way of enabling Africa to cope with the stresses which is going to come about. And you know, Thomas Sankara's thing, right, way back in the 1980s, about cancel the debt, because the debt is something which is which weighs very heavily on Africa. That has to be something which is a major call which has to go out, because the debt is very burdensome to very many, in fact, to most African countries, and is what is the main thing that prevents them from deploying resources to face these emergencies. But that's what I wanted to say there.
Thank you, Michael.
And just
Professor?
at this,
Yes.
yeah. You know, Niger is already affected by radiation due to the exploitation of the uranium, and people living in that area, you know, are just only the suffering, and some of them are even not aware of the dangers, you know, because you know the exploit, you know, the French how do you say, companies, they don't care at all. So, and there is a project now to increase, you know, the amount of uranium being digged, because of the crisis, you know, the energy crisis in Europe. You know, the supply which France used to have, energy which they used to have from Russia, but this has been stopped. So they will definitely try to increase, you know, that deficit, you know, by exploiting more uranium in Niger. In addition to that, they're planning also to build a pipeline which goes from Nigeria through Niger to Algeria and direct to Europe. So the impact of that pipeline will be also, you know, very, very bad on populations, because I don't think this will benefit people, and the environment will be affected, you know. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, There is not much to add on. I guess like on climate change is something that is definitely affecting Senegal as we speak. We have huge problem with flooding at the moment, and these people are being disposed from their homes, and the government did make some promises. It's been 12 years now on those promises around infrastructure being put in place to help with flooding, and yet nothing has been seen. We have people, about a month ago, we have had 8 people that died due to those floodings. So yeah, climate change is something that is affecting us now, but nothing being put in place. I guess this is a bit linked with China as well. Recently, when I went to Senegal, where my grandparents live, the whole road has been is being into construction, and that is at the back of China. China is doing the road, so actually to help with flooding and put in place some better infrastructure and canal system, and that is a contract that we have with China. And what I see there is not Chinese or French people working, but actually Senegalese people working, compared to what I tend to see when actually it's French people having contract where people aren't paid well, and most of the the top people working are French. But in the compare here, what I see on the ground is actually Senegalese people working on them on those on the field, and it's Senegalese people that I see being paid a fair wage and actually having some having some having some perks on top of it, which is their healthcare will be covered and stuff like that. And that's at the back of China. Again, as Michael said, also we have seen debts being paid. And so therefore the thing is, right now in Africa, there is no more propaganda that can actually, Western propaganda that can actually being believed, because we have a young population where like it's very active in social media. They know what is going on in the ground. They are very, very conscious about the situation and the land we live in, poverty being the key. So people are really educated about what's going on. So therefore, you can see in the protests, people are burning, for example, the French flag and waving the Chinese flag and the Russian flags. That says a lot about the trust being put in them. Now, of course, the propaganda is there, but it's not believed. Just to answer the question and to add on the insecurity, yeah, and to add around like insecurities, instabilities alongside that is France was in Niger, reminder that France was in Niger, NATO was in Niger, quote unquote, to fight terrorism. We have seen terrorism there. Nothing has changed. I think Professor Dr. Sahidi has mentioned in his opening remarks, and now where like nothing has been changed. And so therefore peoples have the right to define how they're going to protect themselves. We're going to see instabilities, but again, the answer is a Pan-Africanism, and is a way where like African countries come together and find a way to defend ourselves with allies that actually respect us and respect our dignities. And I think we are going to that route, and I hope we're going to that route.
Thank you, Myriam. So we've got time just to squeeze in one last question before we have to wrap up. And this one is from Zizwe. And the question is, are there any progressive, revolutionary and or Pan-African mass organizations on the ground in Niger or the Sahel or just the region that we can work with? Who are they? Could you tell us a little bit more? Don't know if Professor, did you want to take this one about Niger?
Sorry, can you repeat again the question?
No worries, no worries. So the question, oh, I've also lost the question, 1 second. So the question was, are there any progressive, revolutionary and or Pan-African mass organizations on the ground in Niger or the Sahel, or just the sort of regions you've been talking about that we can work with here from sort of like the West or in the diaspora? And if so, who are they? Can you tell us a bit more about them?
There is a movement, a Pan-Africanist movement in Niger, but it's not very big. But I think they usually intervene on African media. I don't know if you know this online TV channel, which is based in Cameroon. So there are a lot of discussions going on, and so the Niger Pan-Africanists, they're trying to do something as well to demonstrate. And what's interesting is that even young people from Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, the Pan-Africanists, some of them coming over there. For example, the day the 35,000 people, gathered in the stadium, they're not only from Niger. Some of them came from other neighboring countries, to show solidarity. So which is, I think, is a positive. And if you look at what's going on right now, so many young people from all over Africa are now ready, if in case of attack, they're ready to go, they ready even to sacrifice their lives, to save this, this progression of imperialism. So I think you can see an awareness of young people, and this is encouraging because, as you know, more than 80% of the African populations are young people. So the future is in their hands. And I think they're very well aware of what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what I want to add on that is a lot of us are also in a diaspora that work closely with people that are back home as well. So look out for things that are happening. Another thing is, I think what I like to remind people is the fact that Africa was one empire before of the conference of Berlin when we was separated. And what you see is actually people that are in West Africa, in Francophone Africa, we all live with each other. The people, my cousin's best friend is from Niger, and he grew up with us, he went to school with us and stuff like that. So we all live with each other, and we all have, for example, I am Fulani. If you look at my ethnic group from my dad, I am Fulani. So, and my mom, I'm from the South, which is where Usman Sonko is from. So people try to say that this is a whole ethnic, fight as well. I would like to debunk that we all live with each other, we all know each other, and we all live in each other's countries, and it's whole one big group. So that's why Pan-Africanism, that's why these young people are really awake and ready in anything. Basically what I want to say is look out for TBLA as well. What we do, there is a lot of events happening. There is going to be, and we work closely with the Niger community as well. We are planning to do some more upcoming event. There is few in discussion in just upcoming weeks. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. So I'm sorry, I'm hungry. Yeah.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Myriam. Unless anyone had anything, any of our lovely panelists had anything else to add, I believe that sort of wraps up our Q&A section. Thank you so much for everyone for your questions. I know we didn't get around to answering all of them, but hopefully there was some crossover in some of the amazing answers we did get. And as Myriam did say, the Black Liberation Alliance, or TBLA, we will be posting in the weeks to come more about, educationals, protests, demonstrations, sort of like different events and meetups that we will be organizing and co-facilitating or co-hosting with other groups across the UK that feature and center sort of the diaspora and their sort of connections to what's going on anywhere from, Senegal to Niger. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, about us or what we do, please head over to, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook. I think, yeah, also on YouTube, you can see one of our old events. We will be posting a recording of this one shortly afterwards, so you can always watch back. You can always email us as well at theblackliberationialliance@gmail.com. And we have been leaving a link to our coffee, I think it's called Coffee Jar. It's sort of like an online tip jar where you can donate whatever you'd like, and it just helps us to support sort of putting on webinars and stuff like these, because unfortunately all the fancy techie stuff, it does cost. So it's always really useful to have some support with funding on that. But you know, without further ado, I just want to extend again a massive thank you and gratitude to Mike, to Myriam, to Professor Sahidi for joining us on this. So I guess it was sort of like a panel discussion, but for taking us all to school on what's been going on in Niger, in Senegal, across Africa, and you know, in the diaspora as well, because it's really important. As you know, Myriam was emphasizing that, you know, people have been living together, people have been organizing, people have been sort of moving as a community, as a collective for time now, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. If anything, we need to be the ones, especially here in the West, here in the diaspora, to be in solidarity, to join in and lend our support where we can, because this is the fight of people's lives. This isn't a game, this isn't a story, this isn't like some fantasy novel, this is real life, this is the reality that people are living through every day. And the best we can do in our positions in the belly of the imperial beast, as we always keep saying, is we boost those voices, we use our platforms for good, we debunk disinformation. Sorry, that was a mouthful. And yeah, so just again, massive thank you to everyone here who's come, who's contributed, who's popped your questions and comments in the chat box. It is all very welcome, and feel free to message us at any time. Follow us on social media, and you can also there's a link in our link tree, which is on our Instagram, where you can get the link to subscribe to our mailing list as well, where we regularly post about the different events, protests, webinars that we have going on. And we're always welcome to new followers, new members, anyone who wants to get organized, to mobilize, to resist imperialism. Please come join us, no matter where you are in the world, but especially if you're in London, because a lot of us are based here, and it's always a great opportunity to link up and meet up with fellow organizers. So thank you again so much. I hope you all have a lovely evening or a lovely day or morning, depending on wherever you are in the world. And yeah, just follow us on the Black Liberation Alliance. And massive thank yous to Myriam, Michael, and Sahidi once more.